The asteroid mining station Prometheus 7 was supposed to be Jackson River's ticket to early retirement. 3 years of extracting precious metals from floating rocks, banking his hazard pay, and then maybe finding a nice planet with actual weather, instead of the recycled air and artificial gravity that made his bones ache. That was the plan, until the proximity alarms started shrieking at 03 for 7 hours, jolting him from a dream about Earth's oceans. Jackson rolled out of his narrow bunk, grabbed his emergency kit, and stumbled into the corridor, the station's emergency. Lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the floor vibrated with the hum of overtaxed systems. Other miners were emerging from their quarters, hair disheveled, eyes wide with the particular terror of people who lived in a metal can surrounded by the vacuum of space. "What's the situation?" Jackson called to Marcus, the shift supervisor, who was already pulling up holographic displays from his wrist unit. "Unknown vessel, incoming fast." No response to hails, Marcus replied, his weathered face grim. "Trajectory suggests it's not stopping." Through the observation deck's reinforced windows, Jackson could see it a sleek, organic-looking craft that seemed to pulse with its own light. It was beautiful in a way that made his engineer's brain hurt, all flowing, curves and surfaces that shifted like liquid mercury. It was also clearly damaged, trailing sparks, and some kind of luminescent fluid that dispersed in ghostly clouds. The ship struck the asteroid's surface with enough force to shake the entire station. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, and the artificial gravity flickered once before stabilizing. Jackson's ears popped as the atmospheric processors worked overtime to maintain pressure. "I'm going out there," he announced, already moving toward the equipment lockers. "Like hell you are." Marcus grabbed his arm. "We don't know what kind of radiation that thing's putting out, or if it's stable, or if whatever is flying it is hostile." Jackson shrugged him off. "That's exactly why I need to go. Someone might be hurt." He pulled on his environmental suit, the familiar weight of the life support systems settling across his shoulders. "Besides, I'm the only one here with xenobiology training from the academy." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but another tremor shook the station. "Fine, but you take a full hazmat kit and you're on calm every 30 seconds. The airlock cycled with its usual mechanical precision, and Jackson stepped onto the asteroid's surface. The crashed ship had carved a furrow through the mining equipment, coming to rest against a natural ridge of metallic ore up close. The vessel was even more extraordinary. Its hull seemed to be grown rather than built, with a texture like polished bone that still pulsed with fading energy. "Jackson to base," he reported, his voice echoing in his helmet. "Ship appears to be of organic construction. No obvious weapon systems. Hull breach near what I assume is the cockpit." He approached cautiously, his boots crunching on scattered debris that looked more like shed scales than metal fragments. The breach was large enough to step through, and his suit's sensors detected an atmosphere inside thin, but breathable for most humanoid species. The interior was a marvel of biological engineering. Walls curved seamlessly into floors and ceilings, covered in what looked like neural networks that flickered with dying light. Bioluminescent panels cast an otherworldly glow over surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. And there, slumped in what could only be a pilot's chair, was the most beautiful woman Jackson had ever seen. She was humanoid but clearly not human, taller than average, with skin that had a faint silver sheen and hair that seemed to float as if underwater. Her clothing was more like a second skin, adaptive fabric that shifted color with her breathing. But it was her face that made Jackson's breath catch delicate features with high cheekbones, and eyes that, even closed, seemed to hold depths of intelligence and sadness. She was also dying. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, and a silvery fluid that must have been blood pooled beneath her chair. Jackson's medical scanner painted a grim picture: massive internal bleeding, organ failure, and something his equipment couldn't identify that was causing her cellular structure to break down. "Base, I've got a survivor," he reported, his voice tight with urgency. "Humanoid female, critical condition. I'm going to need immediate medical evacuation." "Negative," came Marcus's voice. "We can't risk contamination. Protocol says protocol says to preserve life when possible," Jackson interrupted, already opening his medical kit. "She's dying, Marcus. I can't just watch." The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that shifted between silver and deep blue like storm clouds. She tried to speak, but only a whisper of sound emerged. Her hand moved weakly, and Jackson caught it without thinking. Her skin was fever hot, and the moment their flesh touched, images flashed through his mind, star-filled. Skies, cities that grew like living things, music that sounded like mathematics. He jerked back, startled, but her grip tightened with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered, and somehow he understood her despite the alien cadence of her voice. "Help me." Jackson's training kicked in. He'd seen enough combat casualties to recognize the signs of exsanguination. She needed blood, and she needed it now. His scanner's analysis showed her blood chemistry was surprisingly similar to human iron-based. Similar pH, compatible proteins. It was a 1,000,000 to 1 chance, but it might work. "This is either going to save your life or kill us both," he murmured, setting up the emergency transfusion kit. The woman's eyes tracked his movements, and he saw understanding there, along with something that might have been gratitude. The needle slid into his arm with practiced ease, and he felt the familiar tug as blood began to flow through the transparent tubing. When he inserted the other end into what looked like a major vessel in her neck, her entire body convulsed, light exploded behind her skin, racing along what looked like a circulatory system, but blazed like fiber optic cables. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilating until they were nearly black, and she gasped as if she'd been drowning and had just reached the surface. The effect on Jackson was immediate and overwhelming. The connection he'd felt when they touched intensified tenfold, and suddenly he was experiencing her memories alongside his own. He saw himself through her eyes as strange, compact being with rough skin and kind eyes, risking everything for someone he didn't know. He felt her confusion, her fear, and underneath it all, a growing sense of wonder. Her breathing steadied, and color returned to her silver-pale skin. The wounds were closing, healing at a rate that should have been impossible. But Jackson barely noticed because he was lost in the storm of shared sensation, feeling her thoughts brush against his like silk. "What?" he started to ask, but she was already sitting up, her movements fluid and graceful despite having been near-death moments before. "You gave me your life essence," she said, her voice stronger now and filled with awe. "Among my people, this creates a bond that cannot be broken." Jackson felt the blood drain from his face. What kind of bond? She reached out and touched his cheek, and he felt the warmth of her gratitude wash over him like a tide. "I am Nissa of the Ethereal Collective, and you, brave human, are now part of my soul." The mining station's lights seemed suddenly dim compared to the glow that emanated from her skin. Jackson realized that his simple act of mercy had just changed everything, not just for him, but possibly for both their species. He helped her to her feet, noting how she moved with liquid grace despite her recent injuries. "I'm Jackson," he said, simply, because what else could he say? "And I think we're both in trouble now." The medical bay of Prometheus 7 had never been designed for alien physiology. Dr. Helena Cross stood over her scanner readings with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of biology had just been turned upside down and set on fire. The displays showed two separate beings, but their life signs were beginning to synchronize in ways that made her medical training feel woefully inadequate. "This is impossible," Helena muttered, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses as she studied the holographic readouts. "Your cellular structures are completely different, but somehow your blood is adapting to hers and vice versa." Jackson sat on the edge of the medical bed, feeling strangely lightheaded, but more alert than he'd been in years. Across the room, Nissa remained unconscious on the second bed, her silver skin still pulsing with that ethereal glow. Every few seconds, he caught flashes of her dreams soaring through nebulae, walking in gardens where the plants sang in harmony, standing before beings of light who spoke in colors. "How is she?" he asked, though part of him already knew. The bond between them hummed like a tuning fork, telling him things his rational mind couldn't process. "Stable, but changed," Helena replied. her voice carrying the weight of scientific fascination and deep concern. Whatever you did out there, it's created something I've never seen before. Your DNA is starting to mirror each other's adaptive sequences. It's like you're becoming biochemically compatible in real time. A soft moan drew their attention to Nissa. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing irises that now held flecks of brown Jackson's brown. She sat up with fluid grace, but her expression was confused, almost lost. "I can taste metal," she whispered, her voice carrying a musical quality that made Jackson's heart skip. "And I smell coffee." "What is coffee?" "That would be my memories bleeding through," Jackson said gently, moving closer. "I had some before the alarms went off." Nissa's head tilted as she studied him, and he felt her consciousness brush against his like curious fingers. "You work with your hands," she observed, reaching out to touch his calloused palms. "You build things, fix them. I can feel the satisfaction you take in making broken things whole again." Helena's scanner beeped urgently. "Remarkable. Your brain activity is synchronizing. When she accesses your memories, your neural pathways light up in corresponding patterns. You're sharing experiences across species barriers. Is that normal for your people?" Jackson asked Nissa, who was staring at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "No," she said softly. "The ethereal collective shares emotions through touch, but this is different, deeper. I can feel your thoughts like whispers in a room I've never entered." She looked up at him with wonder. "You saved me because you couldn't bear to watch someone suffer. Even though you didn't know me, even though I might have been dangerous." The intensity of her gaze made Jackson's cheeks warm. "Anyone would have done the same, no," Nissa said with quiet certainty. "They would not. My own people would have calculated risk versus benefit. But you acted from something my language doesn't have words for." "Compassion," Helena suggested, her scientific detachment cracking slightly as she watched the interaction. "Though what I'm seeing here goes beyond normal human empathy. Your emotional responses are amplifying each other." Nissa stood, moving, with that same liquid grace, and walked to the observation window that looked out over the asteroid field. "I was fleeing," she said quietly, "running from a fate I could not accept. My vessel was damaged in the escape, and I thought I would die alone in the void." "What were you running from?" Jackson asked, drawn to stand beside her. This close, he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin and catch her scent like ozone after a storm. "But sweeter." "An arrangement," she replied, her voice bitter. "My genetic line is considered valuable for its psionic potential. The council decreed I should bond with Valdris of the Northern Houses to strengthen both bloodlines." Her reflection in the window showed eyes bright with unshed tears. "But Valdris sees me as a prize to be won, not a person to be loved. I would rather die free than live as a trophy." The pain in her voice hit Jackson like a physical blow, and he found himself reaching for her hand without thinking. The moment their skin touched, he felt her anguish as if it were his own, the suffocating weight of expectations, the cold calculation behind every interaction, the desperate longing for someone to see her for who she truly was. "You're safe now," he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Nissa turned to face him fully, her free hand coming up to touch his cheek. "You mean that? I can feel the truth of it in your thoughts. But safety is an illusion when do civilizations discover their people can bond in ways previously thought impossible." Helena cleared her throat. "Speaking of which, I'm getting readings that suggest your biological merger is accelerating. Jackson, your cellular regeneration rate has increased by 300%. Nissa, your system is adapting to process nutrients your species doesn't normally consume. You're becoming something new. Is it dangerous?" Jackson asked, though part of him didn't care. The connection to Nissa felt like the most natural thing in the universe, unknown. Helena admitted, "But I'm also detecting psionic resonance between you." "Jackson, have you ever experienced telepathic abilities?" "No, but..." He paused, realizing he could sense Nissa's emotions as clearly as his own. "I can feel what she feels. Her memories are mixing with mine." Nissa nodded. "And I understand concepts I should not know. Mathematics, engineering principles, the taste of chocolate." She smiled, and the expression transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. "Your species has such wonderful foods." "Wait until you try pizza," Jackson said. then felt his stomach drop as reality crashed back in. If we get the chance, that is. Marcus is probably already filing reports with Earth Command about first contact protocols. And my people will come looking for me, Nissa added, her smile fading. The Council does not accept defiance lightly. Helena's expression grew troubled. You need to understand something else. The bond you've created isn't just emotional or mental. Your life forces are becoming intertwined. If something happens to one of you, the other suffers as well, Nissa finished. Yes, I can feel it. We are no longer two separate beings who happen to care for each other. We are becoming the halves of a whole. The weight of that revelation settled over them like a blanket. Jackson should have been terrified. His simple act of compassion had bound him to an alien woman he barely knew, possibly forever. Instead, he felt a sense of completion he'd never experienced before, as if a part of himself he hadn't known was missing had finally clicked into place. I should regret this, he said quietly. It's going to complicate everything. Nissa's fingers intertwined with his, and he felt her smile rather than saw it. But you do not regret it. No, he admitted. I don't. Helena's scanner chimed again, and her expression turned urgent. We have a problem. I'm detecting multiple ships approaching the station. Configuration suggests ethereal collective vessels. Nissa's face went pale, the silver sheen of her skin dimming. They found me faster than I expected. Valdris must have used a tracking resonance through our previous bond attempts. Jackson felt a spike of something that might have been jealousy, followed immediately by Nissa's amused affection at his reaction. Forced proximity to trigger compatibility, she explained. It failed because I refused to open my mind to him, but the process would have left trace elements they could follow. She squeezed his hand. You must hide. They will not understand what we have done, and they will see you as either a contamination to be cleansed or a curiosity to be studied. I'm not leaving you to face them alone, Jackson said firmly. Helena was already moving toward the emergency protocols panel. Both of you need to get out of here. I can buy you some time. But if they're as advanced as our xenobiology reports suggest, they'll scan the entire station within minutes. The lights flickered as the station's defense systems powered up, and Jackson felt Nissa's fears spike through their connection. But underneath it was something else of fierce determination, and a growing warmth that he realized was her feelings for him, deepening with every shared moment. There are service tunnels that lead to the old mining shafts, he said, his mind already calculating routes. We can hide there until we figure out what to do. Nissa nodded, but her expression was troubled. You do not understand. If they find us together, they will assume you have enslaved me through some form of human sorcery. My people have little experience with willing bonds. Then we'll have to show them something new. Jackson replied, surprised by his own conviction, starting with the fact that love doesn't require permission. The word love hung in the air between them, and Jackson felt Nissa's shock and joy wash over him in equal measure. Through their bond, he sensed that her people rarely spoke of such things, that affection was calculated and measured rather than freely given. Helena handed them emergency supplies and sealed the medical bay. Go, I'll tell them I treated an injured miner and that you both left in a transport pod. It won't fool them for long, but it might give you a head start. As they moved toward the maintenance corridors, Jackson caught Nissa's hand and pulled her close. Whatever happens, we face it together. She looked up at him with those storm cloud eyes, and he felt her decision crystallize. Jackson caught Nissa's hand and pulled her close. Whatever happens, we face it together. She looked up at him with those storm cloud eyes, and he felt her decision crystallize through their bond. Not just to trust him, but to choose him over everything she'd ever known. Together, she agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted like starlight and possibility. The service tunnels beneath Prometheus 7 were a maze of conduits, maintenance shafts, and forgotten passages that honeycombed the asteroid like metallic veins. Jackson led the way through the cramped spaces, his headlamp cutting through the perpetual darkness, while Nissa followed with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to moving through three-dimensional environments. Behind them, the station shuddered as alien vessels docked with precision that spoke of superior technology. Through the bond they shared, Jackson felt Nissa's anxiety spike with each metallic clang that echoed through the walls this way. He whispered, guiding her down a shaft that angled toward the mining levels. The old extraction chambers go deep, enough that their sensors might not penetrate the ore deposits. Nissa paused, pressing her palm against the tunnel wall. Her skin began to glow softly, and Jackson felt her extending her senses through the metal. There are 7 ships, she reported quietly, a formal retrieval squadron. This is not a rescue mission, it is a reclamation, meaning they have come to retrieve stolen property. Her voice carried bitter resignation. Me, above them, the station's intercom crackled to life. A voice spoke in the melodious tones of the ethereal collective. But Jackson understood every word through his connection to Nissa. Citizens of this installation, we seek the return of Nissa, daughter of the Azure lineage, who has violated sacred bonding protocols. Surrender her willingly, and no harm will come to your settlement. Attempt to conceal her, and we will be forced to implement comprehensive search procedures. Jackson felt Nissa's fear transform into something harder, more determined. They make it sound so reasonable, she said, her eyes flashing with anger. As if I am a child who has wandered away from home, rather than a woman choosing her own fate. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern carved from the asteroid's heart. Ancient mining equipment stood like metal monuments in the darkness, and the air carried the tang of refined metals and old machinery. Jackson led them deeper into the labyrinth of abandoned workstations and storage areas. How long before they realize we're not in the main sections? He asked. Not long. Valdris is with them. I can sense his presence like ice water in my veins. He knows my psionic signature better than anyone. Nissa's hand found his in the darkness. He will also sense the change in me, the part that is now you, as if summoned by her words. A new voice echoed through the station's communication system. This one was colder, more commanding, and it made Nissa's entire body tense. Nissa, beloved, cease this childish rebellion. I have come personally to bring you home. Your little adventure has entertained the council, but it is time to accept your responsibilities to our people. Charming guy, Jackson muttered, feeling protective fury rise in his chest. Through their bond, he sensed Nissa's complex emotions, old fear, anger, and something that might have been shame. He was not always cruel, she admitted quietly. When we were children, he showed kindness, but power changed him, and the council's expectations twisted that kindness into possession. They found shelter in an old survey station, a cramped but shielded compartment where geologists had once analyzed ore samples. Jackson activated the emergency power, and soft light filled the space. In the glow, Nissa looked ethereal but fragile, like spun starlight given form. Tell me about your world, Jackson said, settling beside her on the narrow bench. He needed to understand what she was sacrificing by staying with him. Nissa closed her eyes, and through their bond, Jackson saw visions of impossible beauty. Cities that grew like coral gardens, reaching toward skies filled with 3 moons. Beings of light and grace moving through spaces where architecture and nature blended seamlessly. Music that existed in dimensions beyond sound. Mathematics made manifest in crystalline formations that sang with the harmony of creation. Itself it is beautiful, she said, and he felt her homesickness like a physical ache. But beauty without freedom is just a beautiful cage. The collective values harmony above all else, which means deviation is not tolerated. Love, when it occurs, must serve the greater genetic tapestry. And what would happen to me if they found us together? Nissa's hand tightened on his. They would study you, dissect the bond we share to understand how it happened. If they deemed you useful, you might survive as a research subject. If not, she didn't finish the sentence. A new sound echoed through the tunnels, the rhythmic hum of scanning equipment. The search had begun in earnest. We need to keep moving, Jackson said. But Nissa was already standing, her expression alert. No, she whispered. Something else comes, not my people. The scanning sound grew louder, but it was joined by something else, a predatory clicking that made Jackson's skin crawl. Through the observation port of their shelter, he saw a shape, moving through the shadows. It was humanoid but wrong, covered in what looked like living armor that shifted and adapted to its environment. Zephyr, Nissa breathed. terror flooding through their bond. A freelance retrieval specialist. The council must have hired him to ensure I cannot escape again. Bounty hunter, worse. He collects beings with rare genetic traits for private collectors. If he takes me, I will disappear forever into the black markets of the Outer Rim. The creature paused near their hiding spot, its elongated head tilting as it tested the air. Jackson could see that its armor was actually a symbiotic organism, pulsing, with its own alien life. Sensors extended from its shoulders like metallic tendrils, sweeping the area with methodical precision. "Can you sense what it's thinking?" Jackson whispered. Nyssa shook her head. "His kind are psionically null. That is why they make effective hunters. We cannot read them or influence them." The bounty hunter moved on, but Jackson knew their hiding spot was only temporary. Through the facility's walls, he could hear the ethereal collective conducting their own search with polite but thorough efficiency. They were caught between two forces, both of which saw Nyssa as something to be claimed, rather than someone to be respected. "There has to be another way out," he said, studying the facility schematics on his wrist display. "The old transport tubes, they connect to the external docking ports, if we could reach them. The tubes have been sealed for years," Nyssa pointed out, "and even if we could open them, where would we go? My people have blockaded the entire system." Jackson was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled, the expression carrying a hint of the reckless courage that had led him to save her in the first place. "Who says we need to leave the system?" Through their bond, Nyssa felt his plan before he explained it, and her eyes widened. "The derelict processing station on the outer asteroid. It was abandoned decades ago, but it still has basic life support and some power generation. We could hide there while we figure out our next move." "It is incredibly dangerous," Nyssa said, but he could feel her excitement mixing with her fear. "The radiation from the processing cores, the unstable orbital mechanics. Sometimes the most dangerous place is the safest," Jackson replied. "Neither your people nor the bounty hunter would expect us to hole up in a place that could kill us just as easily as they could." The sound of approaching footsteps, too heavy to be ethereal, too purposeful to be human, made the decision for them. Zephyr was returning, his sensors having locked onto some trace of their presence. "Move," Jackson whispered, leading Nyssa toward the back of the shelter where a maintenance hatch provided access to the deeper tunnel systems. They crawled through spaces barely wide enough for human shoulders, following conduits that carried power and atmosphere to the station's extremities. Behind them, the sound of metal being torn apart suggested that Zephyr had found their hiding spot and was not pleased with their absence. The transport tube entrance was sealed with multiple barriers, each warning of the dangers beyond. Jackson's engineering training kicked in as he assessed the systems, looking for a way to restore minimal function without triggering the safety protocols that would alert station control. "I can help," Nyssa said, placing her hands on the control panel. Her skin began to glow, and Jackson felt her consciousness merge with the station's computer systems. "Your people build with such rigid logic patterns. If I can convince the system that we are authorized maintenance personnel." The seals disengaged with a series of soft clicks, and stale air rushed out of the tube. Beyond lay a tunnel that stretched into darkness, leading to a destination that might offer freedom or death in equal measure. "Last chance to change your mind," Jackson said, though he already knew her answer through their bond. Nyssa's response was to step into the tube first, her luminescent skin providing enough light to see by. "I chose you over everything I have ever known," she said simply. "A little radiation and some unstable gravity will not change that decision." Together, they plunged into the darkness, leaving behind the world of rules and expectations for the uncertain promise of freedom among the stars behind them. Valdris's voice echoed through the station with increasing frustration, while somewhere in the shadows, Zephyr began the methodical process of tracking prey that refused to be easily caught. The tube carried them toward an uncertain future, but as Jackson felt Nyssa's hand slip into his, he realized that uncertainty shared was far preferable to safety without choice. Their bond hummed between them like a tuning fork, creating harmony from two very different melodies, and for the first time since this all began, Jackson felt truly alive. the abandoned processing station Kepler's Rest drifted through the asteroid field like a metal graveyard, its hull scarred by decades of cosmic radiation and micrometeorite impacts. Jackson and Nyssa emerged from the transport tube into a facility that had been left to die slowly in the vacuum, its corridors filled with the ghosts of workers who had once called this place home. Emergency lighting cast sickly yellow pools along their path as they made their way to the central hub. The artificial gravity was weak and inconsistent, making each step feel like floating through thick honey. Nyssa moved with ethereal grace even in the reduced gravity, her bioluminescent skin providing a steadier light than the failing station. Systems, atmospheric processors are still functional, Jackson reported, checking his scanner. Minimal power, but enough to sustain life support in the sealed sections. We should be able to hide here for a while, but not forever, Nyssa said quietly, settling onto a bench in what had once been the facility's observation lounge. Through the reinforced windows, the asteroid field stretched endlessly, a maze of floating rock and ice that glittered in the light of the distant star. My people are persistent, and Zephyr is patient. They will find us eventually. Jackson activated the station's long-range sensors, surprised to find they still functioned. Multiple contacts appeared on the display ethereal collective vessels, maintaining their blockade. Search patterns sweeping through the asteroid field with methodical precision. But there was something else, a larger signature on the edge of the system. Who else knows about this place? He asked, highlighting the unknown contact. Nyssa leaned forward, her expression growing troubled as she studied the sensor data. That configuration is an ethereal council ship, a flagship. Her skin paled, losing some of its natural luminescence. Elder Voss has come personally. I take it that's bad news. Elder Voss is the architect of our genetic compatibility programs. If he is here, it means the council has decided this situation requires direct intervention. Nyssa's hand found his, and through their bond, Jackson felt her fear spike. He will not simply retrieve me, he will study what we have become. The station's communication array suddenly crackled to life, despite having been powered down for years. A voice filled the observation lounge, ancient and carrying the weight of absolute authority. Nyssa, daughter of the Azure lineage, your defiance has become a matter of species interest. Present yourself for examination, along with the human who has contaminated your genetic matrix. Jackson felt anger surge through their bond, not just his own, but Nyssa's as well. Contaminated, she repeated, her voice sharp with indignation, as if love were a disease to be cured. Perhaps we can negotiate, Jackson suggested, though he had little hope for diplomacy. Explain what really happened, make them understand that this was consensual. Nyssa's laugh was bitter. The collective does not recognize consent in matters of genetic heritage. Individual desires are subordinate to species improvement. That I chose to bond with someone outside their approved parameters makes it worse, not better. The communication array activated again, this time with a different voice, younger, more familiar, and carrying an edge of possessive fury that made Nyssa flinch. My wayward bride speaks of love as if it were some primitive human emotion, Valdra said, his tone silky with controlled rage. Perhaps the contamination runs deeper than we thought. No matter what has been done can be undone with proper treatment. Jackson asked, though part of him already knew the answer through Nyssa's growing horror. Genetic realignment therapy, she whispered. They will try to sever our bond by rewriting the compatible sequences in our DNA. It is unpleasant for both parties. Before Jackson could respond, proximity alarms began wailing throughout the station. On the sensor display, 3 smaller craft had detached from the Council flagship and were approaching Kepler's Rest. With obvious intent, boarding parties, Jackson said grimly. How long do we have? Minutes at most, but Nyssa turned to face him fully, her storm cloud eyes bright with unshed tears. There is something I have not told you about our bond, something you deserve to know before they arrive. Through their connection, he felt her preparing to share something that cost her greatly to reveal. Images flowed between them, memories of her childhood on the ethereal homeworld, of genetic testing and compatibility assessments that had marked her as valuable breeding stock. From an early age, I am not just any member of the collective, she said quietly. My genetic line carries a rare psionic trait that appears only once in several generations. Children born from my lineage have the potential to bridge different forms of consciousness, to communicate across species barriers. That's why they want you back so badly. Yes, but also why what we have done is so significant. Her hand pressed against his chest, over his heart. When you saved me, when we bonded, you did not just mix our blood, you created the first successful cross-species psionic link. In recorded history, we are proof that the barriers between civilizations are not as absolute as everyone believed. The implications hit Jackson like a physical blow. They were not just lovers fleeing an unwanted arrangement, they were a living example of something that could change the fundamental relationship between their species. That's what Elder Voss really wants, he realized. Not just to bring you back, but to understand how we did what we did, and to determine whether it can be replicated under controlled conditions. Nissa's voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. If they can create bonds like ours artificially, they can forge connections with any species they choose. It would give the collective unprecedented influence across the galaxy. The station shuddered as docking clamps engaged with the outer hull. Through the reinforced windows, Jackson could see the sleek forms of ethereal vessels attached to the station, like parasites feeding on a dying host. "We need to move," he said. But Nissa shook her head. "Where can we go? They have found us once, they will find us again. And next time, they may not be so interested in taking us alive." "Then we don't run," Jackson said, decision crystallizing in his mind. "We face them on our terms." Before Nissa could ask what he meant, the observation lounge's main entrance hissed open. Ethereal soldiers flowed in with liquid grace, their armor shifting color to match the station's corridors. Behind them came a figure that made Nissa's entire body tense with recognition. Valdris was tall even by ethereal standards, his silver skin bearing the ritual scars that marked him as a warrior poet of the northern houses. His hair moved as if underwater, and his eyes held the cold beauty of stars dying in the void. When he saw Nissa, his expression shifted from controlled anger to something that might have been genuine pain. "Look at you," he said softly, his melodious voice carrying notes of sorrow. "Diminished, tainted by contact with a lesser species. What have you done to yourself, beloved?" "I have chosen," Nissa replied, standing to face him with dignity that made Jackson's chest swell with pride. "Something your people seem to have forgotten is possible. Choice is an illusion when you lack the wisdom to choose correctly." Valdris stepped closer, and Jackson moved to intercept him, only to find energy weapons trained on him from multiple directions. "Stand aside, human. Your interference has already caused enough damage. The only damage here is what you've done to her," Jackson said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "She's not property to be owned or traded." Valdris laughed, the sound like crystal chimes in a winter wind. "How adorably primitive. You speak of ownership as if love were some kind of transaction. But what you have done to her is far worse. You have made her incomplete." "What do you mean?" Nissa asked, though Jackson could feel her dreading the answer. The entrance hissed open again, and a new figure entered, ancient beyond measure, with skin that had gone translucent with age and eyes that held the depth of eons. Elder Voss moved, with the careful precision of someone whose body was failing, but whose mind remained razor-sharp. "What he means, child," Elder Voss said in a voice like autumn leaves, "is that your bond with this human has created a dependency that will ultimately destroy you both. You are sharing life forces across incompatible biological matrices. Without intervention, you will burn out like stars colliding." Jackson felt Nissa's shock and growing horror through their connection. "That's not true," he said, though uncertainty crept into his voice. "We feel stronger together, not weaker." "For now," Elder Voss agreed. "The initial stages of cross-species bonding create euphoria as your systems adapt to each other. But adaptation has limits, and when those limits are reached," he gestured, and a holographic display showed the energy patterns intertwining, growing brighter and brighter until they suddenly collapsed into darkness. "You burn out," Nissa whispered, "both of us."